All right. Well, welcome to the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. It's Thursday, February 23rd, and we're here this morning to hear a proposal related to the FY24 budget about Children's Integrated Services IT. And I want to welcome Matt and Joan. If you guys could introduce yourselves and please go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm Matt Levin. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance.
And I'm Joe Ferrata. I'm with the Family Center Washington County. I'm the co-executive director and the fiscal agent for Children's Integrated Services in Washington County.
So you all have a document that we'll be using to structure our remarks. It should be on the website. We don't have any other written testimony besides this, so we'll just be going over this in a sort of ad hoc way. Joe and I will be passing it back and forth. Our plan is to give you a 5 or 10 minute summary of where things are and then answer questions that you have. Just to repeat what the chair said and to go over the summary, the idea here is to try to find a source of one-time money to help begin the build out of an IT data system for children's integrated services around the state. And this is a project that is ongoing and has made a lot of progress. So it's not a new thing. We're looking to further develop it. You can see from the summary that this is something that the Child Development Division is aware of and has supported. It is, however, a project of the Family Center Washington County, and Joe will provide some detail for that. It's a Salesforce-based system. And what we're looking to do is to bring in other of the CIS regions around the state into that system. The specific number is 768,180. The idea is that each of these regions, which we'll talk about in a moment, can develop and operate this system independently and work towards having a statewide system that can all work together because it's Salesforce. So we bring it to you in a segmented fashion, and there's real benefit for the individual regions to have the system. And it builds us towards the long-term vision of having all those systems be able to work together. So, Joe, you want to talk about CIS and about what's happening now?
So I've been with the Family Center for about 20 years. And so for many years, we are basically a contractor for the state. And so we're providing community services and we receive grants and contracts from the state. And so we go about delivering those services to families and children. Along with those contracts and grants come funds for the delivery of services. However, the funding for tracking data around sort of case management and performance of how well we're doing and whether clients are better off is not there. So funds are not available to us to put a system in place necessarily. And the state, for a variety of reasons, as you well know, over the years, whether it's a capacity issue or whether technology is very difficult to implement, hasn't been able to put a system in place at the state level where we report to the state through, say, nowadays, a cloud-based system where you would log on and enter all your data on a client on a continuous basis, including goals, and whether the client needs some sort of a performance improvement or sort of revisions to their goals and what they are trying to achieve. That's not in place. That's the ideal. It is happening at CDD. In the case of child care financial assistance and eligibility, they recently put a system in place as a Salesforce-based, as opposed to proprietary technology that the state used to create their own systems that then turn into legacy systems that nobody can support. And so nowadays they're using platforms such as Salesforce to do that with. And so it's great. And they recently did that for childcare financial assistance and eligibility. Our system is also based on a Salesforce platform. And so going back a few years back, the state has tried doing a couple of things around data. Unfortunately, they weren't able to implement systems. And so in 2016, we said, okay, we need to do something aside from, just collecting data on paper or Excel sheets because this is not working for us. So we went out to the market and found a developer that worked on a Salesforce platform, and they had a case management system. And so we vetted them as well as many other companies, and we said, let's go with them. And so they essentially, because it's a module system, they created a system for us that sort of captures everything that's required of CIS. And CIS is sort of an umbrella of services, including mental health services, early intervention, sort of developmental delays for children and so forth, family support, home visiting, nursing, and so forth. And so they said, okay, what do you need? We'll create a module for each one of those services, and we'll capture all of that, and you will be able to manage a client from intake all the way to completion. And completion hopefully means that they've succeeded in at least achieving one or more goals, whether it's early intervention or family support. So families, in theory, should be better off. And we said, this is great. So we did the best we could with what we had, but we created the system. And now we're at the point where we realize that the state, for a variety of reasons, capacity, the fact that there's so many projects that ADS is dealing with around technology, as you all know, we're saying, okay, how about we move forward with a community-based approach that replicates what we have in place for CIS? Because the state is not at this point or any point in the near future at the point where they can pull the trigger and say, let's do this for CIS.
Right.
They're not.
So just to back up, so Joe covered a lot of the bottom two items on the first page of our document. Let me back up and just reiterate a little bit about CIS to help fill in some of the blanks. So Joe talked about how the state contracts with the parent-child centers and other community-based agencies to do work in the community. In other states or where there's county-based government or state government, the state actually does a lot of these functions. But in Vermont, these functions are done by community-based agencies. Children's Integrated Services is one of those groups of services that the state has put all together and said, in each of the 12 regions, let's hire a community-based agency to coordinate service delivery so that there's no wrong door for customers, for families, and so that the providers can be more coordinated, more efficient, more effective in the service delivery. So there are 12 CIS regions around the state. In the Washington County region, the family center is the fiscal agent. And so what they did is they had a regional specific solution to the data problem because they couldn't get one from the state. And what we're saying is it's working in Washington County. Can you please help us with some one-time funding to replicate it in other regions? There are 12 regions. They each have their own storyline as to why they exist the way they do. This is Vermont. So as you know from different parts of state government, each region has its own little way of doing things. But we're suggesting let's start the process with this amount of money would allow 3 regions to onboard. We've talked to all the regions. There's different ranges of enthusiasm, but everyone's ready to go. And we know that there are 3 early adopters that are ready to jump on board if funding were provided. So I think that's a good transition to the second page of our document, which talks a little bit more about the specifics, why this makes sense in the budget. But let me stop there and see if you have questions about the underlying situation that we're trying to address.
Representative Morgan. Can you disclose who those 3 are at this point? Or did I miss that?
No, I didn't. So
Winston Prouty Center.
It's in Brattleboro.
Right, that's one. Springfield Parent-Child Center would be another one. Sunrise Family Center would be another one, and Bennington County. So we do. There was no shortage of folks that are interested in doing this. In Winston Prouty and Windham County, Chloe Leary is the executive director. She's constantly talking to me, and she said, "I need to do this. We're desperate to put a system in place." Because our systems are not working. We're spending so much time tracking this data and I can tell you that we are better off simply because we had an actual person doing some of the work, some of the paperwork and some of the filling out Excel sheets. And with the data system, we were able to sort of say, okay, we're going to save some money and not have that position anymore because now our case managers go directly into the system on the cloud. It's a secure system. It's been vetted by ADS last year. They've looked at it and they basically said, your system could be integrated into the system we just created for CDDIS.
Right. But we wouldn't be here if we weren't confident that there were other partners ready to go.
Yeah.
That's our job, right? Is to make sure that when we bring something to you, we've done our side of the homework, and there are definitely entities that are ready to go, should funding be available.
12 CISs, so is it roughly safe to say sort of one per county with a couple counties blending?
That's right. That's right. The regions, they follow them. This committee doesn't focus on it so much, but the Agency of Human Services has its own regional map that largely follows the lines, but doesn't entirely. So for instance,
It's the same map they use.
yes, it's the AHS map. So for instance, it's a rather confusing, in Orange, Windsor, and Wyndham counties there's, as Representative Wiki knows, there's a strange line, a couple lines in there that divide counties.
County line.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And Grand Isle goes in with Franklin. And the Northeast Kingdom has its own set of separations. But yeah, it's 12 regions throughout the state.
So I want to get to questions, but I just want to take one quick step back and make sure the committee is grounded in why this proposal here, which is, so we have information technology in our jurisdiction.
Right.
This is an AHS facing or an AHS consumer, our agencies who are in the CIS business need a customer management, a case management platform. And and in my own sales life outside of here, have worked really, really hard to get everybody in my business off of Excel spreadsheets and into a CRM so that it's not static. And the kind of work that Joe's talking about, the manpower, the man hours, the person hours, I should say, that it takes to constantly update static sheets that are being used by multiple people is really, really bad, especially when you have multiple providers trying to serve the same client. So I wanted to root everybody in, like, you both talked about the problem we're trying to solve, but the tool, I don't know how familiar folks are with Salesforce or CRM platforms, but it is so much better than using spreadsheets.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And the idea, as Joe said, is to both either and or save some money by not having so much staff, but just as importantly, more importantly, get more care to families, right? If these agencies are spending less time and money on paperwork, they can spend more time and money and person hours on providing services to families and getting better outcomes. That's the goal.
All right, so I've got Representative Murwicki and then Waters Evans.
Sure. I just wanted to add some context here too. Is going back more than a decade now, Children's Integrated Services was developed to coordinate services in each area, because at the time, these services might have been provided by 15 different providers, and the thought was bring this under one roof here. So the services are better coordinated and more efficient. To do that, a lot of data was needed to prove that they were doing the work and to make it more effective. And this is what's happened, though. As they said, they're inputting data on Excel sheets by hand. And if we really want them to be effective and efficient, this is an essential tool that they're going to need. So the services, so we know, because there's federal and state funding here, they need data to rationalize the funding, but also to make sure the services are getting to, and they're effective. So this is an essential tool that I think, I understand this is a project for a small amount, but we need this across the state. If we really want to be more efficient and effective, this is the kind of tools we need. It's not dissimilar from what we're hearing from other agencies, whether it's the judiciary. We need to do these upgrades on data.
Representative Waters Evans.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Thank you. And now I can't see them. Okay. The first question is, do these agencies share this data with each other? Like if somebody moved from Bennington to, Burlington, or like a different area that was serviced by, a different agency.
Sure.
Do they currently share it? Would this allow them to share it?
Yeah, the system is set up, not necessarily our data system, but overall CIS is set up in a way so that if a family transitions from one region to the next, there's a warm handoff in terms of one region sort of creates a transition plan for that family.
Okay.
Right. And so And sometimes you will get a case where a family is receiving one service in one region and another service in another, say specialized childcare, for example, because they can't find childcare in one region, so they have to go somewhere else. And so potentially there's a client that's being served by two regions. So it gets a little complex, right? But to your point, the system should work in theory as there's 5 services and there's only one service plan, and everybody adds to that service plan. And so you can imagine in, say, Chittenden County, as an example, where there's 5 providers under the CIS umbrella. And they're all in separate offices. And so if it's paper, it's much more difficult to sort of input data into that service plan and track it in a way that's efficient.
Right.
But it does work. I'm just going to say the CIS works in an amazing way because the providers or delegates from the providers meet every week to address the needs of clients in a unified way. So if a client comes in from a referral, they'll all talk about what the needs of the client are and how to address them, who should be the primary service provider and who should go first.
So there's a structure in place to do what you're saying. This would make it better.
Because it gets rather complex on paper.
Right.
And so
that's why. But yes, it does happen.
Imagine a cloud-based system where you got 5 different agencies that can log on and they can access the case record for a client.
Right.
And all the information is there. As management, I have a different set of permissions. I can basically track the performance of the employees. I can see how everybody is doing or not and sort of put a performance improvement plan in place if I need to. I can see how well we're doing. It's like the data is at our fingertips,
right.
And it's just amazing.
Right.
Sorry, I had one more follow-up question to that, which is then it seems ideal and like it would be more efficient and all of these things and really helpful for the families. So then what would be the reasons for an agency not wanting to participate or be part of this?
Let me get to that because I know we're running out of time and I want to make sure we cover the information on the budget. So let me answer that by jumping to the budget. We're asking for funding to support the things that are exactly the difficulties for agencies to do implementation. So obviously the Family Center has developed the software. They have it set up. It's essentially basically plug and play, like ready to go. The challenge is onboarding. The challenge is transitioning. The challenge is getting the training for your staff to do what you need to do and having some of the technology and equipment that is necessary. Most of the agencies have the technology and equipment, but not all of them. And so if you look at the budget, you'll see that the budget covers the licenses and fees that are the basic things to use the Salesforce. But then some of these other things that, again, most of them are spread out over a 3-year period because the idea here is that we have 3 agencies at a time. But there's a little bit of the second line is building the additional modules. We hope to build it out. Joe referenced there are 3 of the 5 CAS modules are built out. We want to build it out to all 5. But then the rest of these things are training, transition, system administrator, the contract with Exponent Partners, but equipment and tech needs. So what's stopping the representative is that they're ready to go and they have no one on staff or no consultants available to train staff, to walk them through it, to figure out how to wrangle the data and get it into the new system. All of which we're confident can be done with funding, finding the right people out there in the world. Joe and I were joking in the hallway, given all the layoffs in the tech industry, there are actually a lot of people who are available to do these kinds of projects out there. And so that's the hang up. It's not a lack of interest. It's not having the resources. Most community agencies are operating on a shoestring. They don't have extra people. You know, they can't go out and do what the Family Center did, which was write the grants and find the community partners to pay for the initial build out. That's what this is all about. And so the contract lays out doing that over a 3-year period. I'm sorry, the budget lays out doing that over a 3-year period.
Yeah, just a quick question. Of the 12 regions, how many families a year are served through?
We both serve families that are low income. The services are basically available to everyone. And on average, we are billing about across the state 1,550 cases. So That's what we're billing. That we serve more families than the families that we're billing for, but that's a different issue altogether. It gets a little complicated, but yeah, on average about 1,550 a month.
So around between 1,500 and 1,600 families a month. A month. Now, statewide. Now, I mean, that you don't add that up. It's because of the churn in the system, it's not 1,500 times 12, right? So in many cases, the same family's in there all, for multiple months. So it's a little hard to answer your question because there isn't a data system that allows us to answer your question. But that's the scope and scale. That's the general sense.
Thank you.
And just, again, as Joe said, some of these services are connected to Medicaid, but basically CIS is not an income-based system. It's need-based. If you have a child who has a failure to eat syndrome or failure to thrive syndrome, they don't ask you how much your family income is. They say, come on in, let's get you the services that you need. So it doesn't correlate to other programs like Reach Up or Three Squares or other things that are income-based. It's universal access for any family that might need it.
Thanks.
And I just want to point out, there's some other things that I won't go into. You can read them on the top of that second page. You can see.
Give y'all a few extra minutes since we started late. And
Sure.
We're going to get into a much bigger bill discussion after all of this.
Okay.
So I'm happy to go a little bit longer.
All right.
I don't feel you have to.
Very good. So let me just point out some of the benefits here, because again, this is a project that has been developed by Family Center. It's got a track record, and Exponent Partners is ready to go. They've worked with the Agency of Digital Services in the development of it. The folks at the main office of Children's Integrated Services are aware of this project. This is not something out of left field. As we said, it's expandable. That's the whole point of this. It's both Salesforce makes it expandable and the fact that it can go throughout the state in this way. We feel it's very cost effective. It does line up with other systems that CDD is working with Salesforce platform to implement, which means in the back end, they can all get tied together eventually. And again, as I said, this phased in model allows us to work over time to not rush the community providers too quickly, but also to utilize funding that's available and to bring it in and then tie it all together at the end of the plan.
Representative Morgan.
Matt, that it appears, so this coming fiscal year's ask would be just under 800K, but then you have the rollout for the whole program in totality is another $1 million over the next 2 ensuing fiscal years, is what you're saying, to get basically all 12 regions on board.
Right.
For 1.8. And that's okay. Appears to be your end state, and that would be, everybody be on board and rolling, more or less.
And in terms of the ongoing costs, we had talked about that. The idea is that those would be modest enough so that the agencies would be able to absorb the ongoing costs. Once they got the tech they needed and the training they needed, sure, we're not suggesting that it's free after that, but it's a modest cost that they would be able to build into their budget, and we assume they'd be able to absorb it.
So on a continuous basis, we have licensing fees, but we do expect to have to pay a developer to support the program throughout its life, and that's what we do. And so that's just part of our budget. And so we can afford to do that because the grants and contracts allow us to make those, to have those expenses in place.
Right.
Thank you.
Representative Chase, do you have any questions?
I've had most of mine answered already.
Yeah, and I guess my one question would be that Salesforce obviously is a commercially available CRM platform. It's not like something was developed custom, but the modules inside, the structure, the architecture of the specific case management modules that you're using, are those pretty standard in terms of what the needs are going to be between the regions?
Yes, and speaking of the developer that uses a Salesforce platform, the name of the company is Exponent Partners. So they are in the business of supporting human services with their case management system model. And so in essence, they've just created these basic modules that can be replicated or customized, and that's what they did on our behalf. They already have a formula and they said, okay, what do you need that this doesn't cover? And so they're constantly adapting or improving the system to meet our needs. And so on a regular basis, I will contact them if I get feedback, say from the state. If the state has a different requirement, I will get in touch with the developer and say, we need this new requirement to be in place for this particular case system, and they'll do it. If providers say, this is not really working for us, it's a little clunky or it doesn't work very well, I'll take the information, take it to the developer, they put the fix in place.
And just to reiterate.
On a continuous basis.
Right, just to reiterate, so there's a slight twist in the answer to your question. Most of the regions of the CIS regions operate the same way, right? So the basic platform would work for all of them, except for 2 of them. So full disclosure, there are 2 regions. If you do the math, if you think about the math, there are 2 regions that actually have a different billing system in the state because of an experiment that was launched many years ago that sort of started and then stopped. So the Addison region and the Franklin region use a different billing system. We're only asking for 9 regions, right? Because 3 plus 3 plus 3 is 9. Joe's is 10. And then there's Franklin and Addison that don't actually use the same billing system. So we're just putting them aside. They're supportive of this project. They like it. Maybe someday they'd migrate to it, but not until they have the same billing system as everyone else. So the short answer to your question is yes, it's essentially the same amongst 10 of the 12 regions. They would use the same platform. Franklin and Addison have their own system that they're using that connects at the end of the process so the state can get all the data in one place. But that's the state's problem.
They could
Talk to
onboard.
the state about this before we do anything.
But I mean, the point here is that there's so much benefit that can be gained by having this work done in a phased in way. We're very confident that the right thing to do is to bring this system to the regions that are ready to use it and want to use it and allow them to get the efficiency on the regional level, which will then grow into efficiencies at the state level.
So as an example, our family center is part of the Parent-Child Center network across the state of Vermont. These 2 regions that Matt is referring to that are outside of the CIS system but still deliver CIS services, they were integrated into a bigger IFS, family integrated services. That happened a few years back with the state. The state didn't follow through. And anyways, so they joined a different sort of network of sorts, but they still deliver the same services. Right. So when I speak to the director of NCSS, one of those 2 regions, they will say to me, Joe, I am part of a DA.
Designated agency.
Our Parent-Child Center is part of a DA, a larger agency, and we are forced to use their EMR. Our EMR is not a case management system. I've seen your system. If I can, I will jump on board.
Right.
Because our system meets the needs of CIS in a way that an EMR wouldn't, because it's not built as a true case management system.
That's electronic medical records.
Yes.
Trying to really acronym.
Right.
Yeah. Representative Hengo.
So that, I'm really familiar with NCSS. I live in Franklin County. So that brings up a quandary for me. How does the state, I mean, I feel like you're asking for this so that the state can, and you can follow cases and track them and accumulate information, data about these cases. So Franklin and Addison are really big population areas. How are you going to follow what's happening for children in those areas if you don't talk to each other on these computer systems?
We do. I think we're talking about 2 different things, right? So for example, Yeah, okay. So for example, the system that would be available to each region is a system that would be available to the 5 programs in CIS in each region, right? So in theory, that would be the start. If and when, say, NCSS or Addison decides to join the system, they could use it as well. So now they're using a different system, and they're not necessarily going to be connected. They would only be connected if the state sort of implemented this system in the long term.
I understand that, but I don't understand how your organization is going to be able to follow what's happening with children in those 2 different regions.
I think it would be largely the same as it happens now, which is we described in an earlier question. The information is bundled up and passed from region to region. It would just be a different kind of bundle because it would be a Salesforce bundle, but that doesn't mean it would be difficult or different than it is now. It's an acknowledged hitch in the system that not all the CIS regions use the same, that there are these 2 regions that use a different system, but they've got workarounds in place to handle that. And that's just sort of an understood situation that happens all the time, every day, right now. So we wouldn't be changing the underlying question. It would still be a question of how to perfect the coordination between those regions, but it wouldn't be worse than it is now. And in fact, it would probably be better. I'm guessing that I'm not answering your question.
No, but
So we all,
same question.
Well, I do, but in a different way that might,
okay.
Might
if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
So all I was going to say, and Lisa again gave the prelude to what I'm going to say is, aren't efficiencies developed when we're standardized? Why wouldn't we want to drive those other 2 regions to, hey, come on board, be part of a standardized? Because you're going to, in the end, you have efficiencies that create less work, correct? I mean, or am I missing a component of this?
Yeah, I think we're just proposing to improve the systems that are in place in each region. We're not necessarily saying that those 2 regions are not interested. They might be interested. They're now part of a bigger system. So the question is whether what we have to offer is something that they're willing to implement, or whether they're saying they're basically wishing to stay with the system that they have. And that system basically reports to the state in the same way that the other regions are reporting to state using Excel and pencil and paper, or whatever the case may be. And so, yes, please, Representative. Oh, sorry.
I just want to build on that then. So the state, who ultimately needs this information, is getting what they need.
Yes.
Just in a different way from 2 of the regions.
Yes,
that's correct.
Because you're on a different system, you want to upgrade the type of system you use.
Yeah.
To report to the state. Okay.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Exactly.
And I think thank you, that's better said than I did, obviously. And I think that's one of the benefits, as we say here, of doing this in a phased in manner.
Yeah.
I mean, this stuff is hard. It takes time to figure it out. That's one of those questions that certainly is down the road. And we would look forward to working with the state to solve it. But it doesn't get in the way of the fact that we can phase this in and move in that direction.
In theory, we're coming up with a solution that's more of a short-term solution than the state is able to provide. And we have the experience of many years of the state attempting to provide a system, and it hasn't happened. And millions of dollars have been spent. And here we are saying, okay, it's up to us then to create a system. And so we put a system in place, and now we're saying to others, do you want to use our system? It's better than what you have.
And they're saying yes.
I think that's go ahead, Representative Chase.
Just want to clarify, when he's talking about short-term solution, that means a rapid deployment, not something that's going to be obsolete in the near future.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yes.
Thank you.
I
Yes.
didn't assume that.
Yes, yes.
All right. Well, thank you for being with us and bringing this proposal. We'll be having a conversation, I believe, as we need to give feedback next week on the budget about a number of issues. And this is one that I'd like to have us include in our thinking on that for the committee. So Thanks for being with us today, and you may follow up with some questions via email.
Yes, I'm available anytime to answer questions. I'm in the building most days, and Joe is just a short distance away. We can reach out to him anytime.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Right. I believe Tim is here remotely, and while he gets situated, and I wanted to let the committee know that for ease of appearance on our agenda as we work on it, and because of one of the key provisions that we have in the draft was already in H97, I this morning said, let's stop having DR number, some number that nobody can ever remember, and we'll do a strike all, as we so often do in this building, and put our elections bill on H97. So
I assume that's what you did, yeah.
yeah, so H97 is the miscellaneous elections bill we've been talking about as a strike all amendment. So H97 way easier than DR, some number we can't figure out what it is. So H97, you'll remember a couple weeks back, Representative Shy brought that, and that has that raising the threshold of primary votes, very much the one of the cruxes of this whole bill. So I just wanted everybody to understand what I was doing there and make sure no one was confused. So Representative Hango, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. The only objection I have to this, and I know it's out of your control, is that it still has the title of the original bill. And that really bothers me, looking at this. Somebody outside would think we're just talking about Representative Shy's bill.
I hear that point. We are talking about Representative Shy's bill. We're just adding some more to it. So I hear that. I also think that it's one of those things where I think our process can be opaque and confusing because we have an iterative, evolving process as bills move through the building. I think that the drafting request numbers and the way those appear are more confusing than the potential bill titles. So that's the discretion I'm deploying here. Open to that criticism, but I think this will make it easier for folks to understand which bill we're on and what we're talking about as we work on this over the next days and weeks. So Representative.
That was my question too, was the title. Coming off guard.
I have been told by the clerk that we have the ability to change the title when we actually pass the bill.
Right.
So,
But not until then.
but we could, I will ask about, in terms of the convention of how it appears on our agenda, we could add something parenthetically to that, and an other miscellaneous election policy or something to that effect. Andrea, if you can look into that for me about how we can make it the most clear to folks that we're still talking about the bill.
That would be great because, if you look back to yesterday, it kind of looks like, okay, we've stopped talking about that bill totally. Yeah. And now we're on to some different bills. So that's just my objection.
Yeah.
And it always has been. This isn't anything new.
I'm not taking it personally.
Yeah,
good. Duly noted.
Legislative technique that's been around way longer than any of us have been alive.
S-53 last year.
All day,
I will say, I would not have done this without the express consent of the lead sponsor of H97. So Representative Shy, I said, hey, I'm looking to attach this to one of the actual bill numbers so that we can just start calling it a bill. And she asked me a few clarifying questions and said, sounds like it's her cup of tea. So really appreciate all of you bearing with that change. So now, Tim, H97, you've got a draft that's on our legislative page. I will say before Tim starts that what I was feeling yesterday was that the new language I put on the table had maybe gotten us a little bit unmoored from the conversation that we'd been in. So I'm hoping today, we got H97 in front of us, clean draft. There's no substantial changes to what I put on the table yesterday. I think we're including both of the things that we talked about yesterday. So I'd like to have Tim walk us through what's in the bill as it is presented here, and then have us talk about what are the things we like to see, questions that people have about what's there. I really want people to understand this version of the bill and where it sits today. So that's what all I'm trying to get done before lunch is, before 11:30 when we have another bill presentation, is to just get the committee to really feel like we understand what the words on the page are now in this latest draft of the bill. So Tim, thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Mr. Chair. For the record, Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel.
You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Microphone is up. Negative.
There we go. We got you now.
Good.
It was
Sorry.
us.
Good. Thank you very much, Chair McCarthy. For the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. Before you have a strike all amendment, which, as the chair just stated, is substantially the same as what was proposed yesterday in the committee bill version 2. Let me say that the first area of substantive change is on page 3. And I have maintained the highlights that were yesterday of the material that the committee was either discussing or in the middle of discussing or had not yet been presented with for review. So at the bottom of page 3, we have what I retitled nominee parties printed on ballots. And this again is Title 17 VSA Section 2474. Please note that I have reordered some of the section numbers, and so those are highlighted as well. But we'll go right into this choice of party. And let's see, subsection A has been again reworked to strike subdivision 1 and then reformat subdivision 2 into just A. And of note, it reorders the substance of what should be printed on the ballots and in what order. Specifically, and I'll just read this again, and then maybe perhaps turn it over to Director Will Senning to kind of fill in some of the context behind it. A reads, if a nominee is nominated by more than one party, the Secretary of State shall print on the ballot those parties next to the nominee's name by listing in this order: 1, the major political party for which the nominee had the nominee's name printed on the ballot in the primary; 2, any major political parties for which the nominee won the nomination by write-in vote; 3, any major political parties that nominated the nominee by the party committee in order in which the nominations were submitted to the Secretary of State; and 4, any minor political parties that nominated the nominee by party committee in the order in which the nominations were submitted to the Secretary of State. And I'll pause there just to note that item number 2 was slightly reworked for clarification sake to state that the nominee wins the nomination, not just receives write-in votes. And Mr. Chair, would you like me to move on to subsection B or pause there for?
Yeah, so what if I understand this right, Tim? So all we've done here is just we're talking about the order that the nominations would appear. So it's automatic. It's not just a choice. It's that if you file to run as a Democrat and you win that nomination, that'll be the first party that appears.
That's correct. And the differences from today are just slight changes for clarification's sake.
I also wanted to say, before we invite Director Senning to talk to us about the mechanics of this, I invited him to tell us how this proposal might work logistically. This is not a proposal that is coming from the Elections Division. This is a proposal that I and other folks are asking to put on the table, but it is not coming from the Elections Division. Will's here to comment on how the consequences of it might be, but as opposed to yesterday when the Elections Division very much brought to us the idea that they've long been working on around electronic ballot returns that's later in the bill. The clerks brought us the proposal around write-in candidates, but this particular language is not from the Elections Division. I just want to make that really clear before anybody starts to ask Will why we're doing this. I'm happy to take those questions. But Will can tell us how it'll work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that context. And Will Senning, Director of Elections from the Secretary of State's office, for the record. And I won't spend too much time. I sort of explained the mechanics of this yesterday. And Mr. Chair, you just summed it up probably better than I could. I'm more long-winded usually, which is to say that if you are nominated by multiple parties via the primary, via committee nomination, you used to have 10 days to contact our office and tell us what order you would like those parties to appear next to your name on the general election ballot. And the reworking of this section makes that automatic. Maintaining the list that we had in the previous statute, the order of those parties that we had in the previous statute, if we didn't hear from a candidate within that 10-day period, then we had to put something on the ballot. So we had a default list. That's what's reflected here, except that it surprised me when I looked through it. It had previously placed a major party committee nomination before a write-in vote nomination. And my understanding from the committee was that they preferred that order be changed such that a write-in nomination would come before any nominations made by a party committee. And I would point out, just while we're talking about this to Chair McCarthy, sorry, it's a good chance to say this, and we may touch on it again later. If a person both files an independent petition on time by the new deadline back before the primary and also receives a party nomination, there's a provision in the law, and it isn't being changed, that says you cannot appear as both an independent and a party candidate on the general election ballot. You have to choose one or the other of those.
That's interesting. So, and Will, in that instance where an independent who filed as an independent was then nominated by a party to fill a vacancy in their primary, we haven't changed the candidate's discretion there. The candidates would still be able to choose here.
Yes.
I just don't want to make sure I haven't done anything where I've put a closed loop or or sort of made some impossible thing happen.
Nope.
Okay, great. Representative Hango had a question.
I'm fine, thank you. I misread something.
Okay. Good. So let's move on to item B here.
Yes. At the top of page 5 on line 1, subsection B now reads, a candidate for state office who is the nominee of 2 or more political parties shall file with the Secretary of State not later than 5 p.m. on the 10th day following the primary election, the statement designating for which party the votes cast for the candidates shall be counted for the purposes of determining whether the candidates' designated parties shall be a major political party. And then it strikes the remaining section as well as subdivision 2 of this. I'll pause there.
Representative Chase.
Could you clarify that, restate in slightly different wording? I'm not sure I'm picking up the meaning here.
So what we're trying to do here is to say, if I understand it right, Tim, is if you're a candidate and you've won your major party primary and you either got a nomination or were written in one of the other paths to get a second nomination, then you have to tell you have to tell the Secretary of State which one of the parties you want your votes counted toward their major party status. That's what this part's about, right? And so I wanted to make it really clear to folks that I'm not trying to endanger any of the parties' ability to get major party status through this vote or through this bill. My intention is to have the nominations that appear on the general election ballot reflect the will of primary voters and to have some more integrity than they do today. But preserving this language this way allows the candidate, even though the party they filed in will appear first, based on the first change that we made, they can still designate the votes in their second nomination or third nomination, if they got a third one, to go toward that party's major party status calculation. Will, do you want to expand on that?
I understand that was well put, Mr. Chair. I would just point out, for the committee's reference, this requirement around major parties is actually found in the definitions section of Title 17. If you want to look, now I'm scrolling up for what the section is. It's 2103. And it's under the party definition, political party. There's a subcategory for major political party, and it says a major political party is a political party whose candidate for any state office in the most recent general election polled at least 5% of the vote cast for that office. So just as Mr. Chair described, this is the candidate telling us that which of those parties, if they have multiple listed, we would be looking to apply that 25% threshold, 5% threshold, excuse me. And I think you described it well in that the effect of that is that even though we're mandating the order, we're not at the same time, for instance, saying the first party listed has to be that party that the accounting goes toward. It still gives the flexibility, like you said, to make that choice.
Does that answer your question, Representative Pango?
Yeah, I think that made it less clear for me. I'm kind of looking through here, and I'm counting in my head that there are 3 different filings that one must do. And maybe I'm wrong, because now I'm not seeing the second Friday before the primary.
So I understand your confusion. I think I can help you out, Representative Pango. In this section at the top of page 5, the only thing we're talking about is if you win multiple nominations. Mm-hmm. So you've got, say, the Democratic and the Progressive. This allows you as a candidate to say, I want the votes that were cast for my first or my second or maybe even my third party designation to count toward that party's qualification as a major party. So because we have this threshold that's already in law, this isn't something I was proposing on changing in this bill at all. But I'm just all this section does is maintain that flexibility. You are talking about the filings if you're a write-in candidate to have your votes counted at all by the clerks. And that's a proposal later in the bill that is not related to this one.
But in a way, it's the candidate's responsibility for 3 different filings. So I'm trying to count them in my head. How many times am I going to have to contact the SOS office?
This does not require the candidate.
No, I understand that. But if you want it, then yes, it does require you to do that. If
it were me, so what I'm trying to do by preserving this in the bill is to not force any candidate to. I want to maintain the flexibility that candidates have in this area, in this bill, and the default can just be the default, and the candidates don't have to do anything more, but the flexibility is there for them.
But you're making it more difficult for people to run as fusion candidates.
Certainly.
More onerous.
Definitely. What I would say is I'm raising the threshold of what qualifies you to be a fusion candidate. So the bar is higher. I'm raising the bar. So it's a higher bar to jump over. It's a little more onerous, but I'm still trying to maintain a lot of the flexibility for candidates that do qualify to be a fusion candidate in this section. So Representative Byron and Representative.
Just a footnote on that. I mean, if you really want that fusion designation, that I don't see this as being onerous. I see this as just it's like slightly more work. But if you truly want it and don't just want it to fall in your lap, I don't see this as being a high bar.
And I get that, but what is the overall, the underlying problem that adding this level of work solves?
Candidate clarification to like.
To whom?
To the voters.
Okay. We won't go there.
Well, I think, so I want to get through some point, so just, we will.
I know we're not getting anywhere.
So I want to really get through the bill so people understand what's in it before we have all of our debate about all of it. So I want to really have people understand what I'm proposing here.
I was hoping maybe, could we have like a hypothetical where this like policy lever creates the outcome you're referring to?
Will, I think you've got one.
I probably could come up with one quickly. I wanted to really quickly put one fine point on it also, if it helps Representative Hango in terms of the scope of where this applies. Number one, this would only be required of candidates for statewide office.
Oh.
So the top 6. Those are the only candidates for which the 5% requirement for major party status comes into play. And moreover, there is no extra filing. You'll notice that the section we're talking about right now is current law, except for a single change, I think, to the his or her being changed to the candidate's name. It's in current law right now that you have to, the statewide candidates only, because it's only relevant to them, have to notify us of how they want this applied. And they're very aware of that as they're launching their statewide candidacies, that this is something they have to think about.
Sorry, I don't see statewide here, Mr. Senning, so where are you seeing?
Line 1-5.
A candidate for state office on top of page 5.
Top of page 5.
Line 1, page 5.
And that state office is defined in the definition sections of Title VII.
Big 6.
Okay, so none of this applies to any of our elections.
No, not this section that's at the top of page 5. No.
And this is something that already has to be done by a statewide candidate?
Yes, all I'm doing is preserving the status quo in this particular area.
When was the last time there was a statewide fusion candidate?
This past fall.
Yeah, like
Oh, yeah.
he gave testimony.
Yeah.
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 I thought he just took D. I seriously.
And for the.
So it's my understanding that Carol from the Vermont Municipal Clerks and Treasurers Association has limited time with us. And I don't want to get hung up on this provision that isn't even a change in the bill. So I think we have an understanding that this particular piece is not really changing from current law. The next pieces that we're going to talk about are specifically related to the original, the proposal that was in the bill and was also in the bill that Representative Brennan brought to us around the write-in candidates and a consent for write-in candidates. And I know that that is one of the key pieces that we need to understand and make some decisions about as we look at this bill, because it's integral to the whole proposal. Yes, Representative Morgan.
Not to belabor it, but I know you want to move on. But so just prior to on page 4, that applies to all of us then, or only?
Yes.
That's all of us.
So
correct.
The stuff on page 4 just says
everybody.
If you ran as a D or an R or a P and you designated that and you win that primary, even if you get multiple nominations, that
applies to everybody.
First thing that appears on the ballot. So that was a key part of the compromise that I'm trying to create in this bill. That's a great question, Representative Moore. Yes.
That's what we're trying to figure out.
Yeah, that piece applies to everybody. And then that B that's at the top of page 5 is existing process for statewide candidates for that 5% threshold to qualify for a major party status.
I had thought that Zuckerman just took the D. Cool. I'm down.
I believe there was even question about the exact number of write-in votes on the primary ballot in Middletown Springs was part of that whole conversation.
I was the one that asked that.
Wow. I love the examples of engineering.
Yeah, true.
So great. So I want to, I wanted to just take, push pause on the walkthrough and zoom out a little bit to the provision on write-in candidates, filing a consent form and the mechanics of that a little bit, because a number of questions have come up offline that I'd like to get out into testimony about that. So Carol, thank you so much for joining us. I know you weren't feeling great the last couple of days, so I really, really deeply appreciate you being willing to take time with us this morning.
Thank you for having me. You'll have to forgive. I'm sequestered with COVID and I've got the voice to go along with it. So, but thank you for inviting me.
So I appreciate you being here to give further testimony on this bill where we've now done a strike all. It's H97. So we took Representative Shai's bill. And so H97 is our miscellaneous elections bill now. And it includes and has gone even a little further, found a further use for the proposal to have write-in candidates file a consent form. And in those sections, I think that start, I think we're starting here with section 10. In those sections, Carol, there's been some conversation with committee members, with folks out in the hall here about what it kind of means to report write-in candidates and how the names get reported. So I'm wondering if we can go back to the original, zoom out to the original intent and what the VMCTA is hoping for us to accomplish by having a write-in consent form, and just kind of start there, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so the original intent of the request is, excuse me, to streamline the process, obviously keeping in mind that we need to capture the data that's important to the elections. As I emailed to you last night, from the Berry City perspective, for the August primary, we had 212 separate individual names that were written in as candidates during the August primary, for a total of 522 votes. And of those, only 12 of them had 10 or more votes cast for them. And every single one of those 12 people was a candidate on a different party ballot that people had written in on the other party, on another party ballot. The biggest example being Governor Scott, where 69 Democrats wrote him in as the gubernatorial candidate on the Democratic ballot. So clearly what voters are doing are trying to vote for the candidate they want, but in a party that's not related to that candidate. And there's a disconnect there with the voters as to what the primary is for. But what that ends up doing is it ends up creating this long list of names and votes that are reported. And there doesn't seem to be the need for that kind of documentation and time spent both having election workers codify all those names at the end of the night and then have the clerk's data entering them into the system the day after. There are similar numbers for the general election to a slightly lesser degree, but this is indicative of what usually happens for the primaries.
So I think one of the things I want to invite committee members who've raised some concerns about this that's come up, Carol, is this idea that if we count generic write-ins instead of the specific candidate that was written in, if we don't report, somebody who, if I don't like any of the candidates for the office for high bailiff and I write my own name in as high bailiff, I have no intention of seeking that office. I don't want to be the party's nominee for that office, but I write my name in instead of any of the candidates that are printed on the ballot. I think there's a desire from some folks to sort of preserve the expression of the will of the voters or elevate that in some way. And so I'm holding this tension with some of the things I've heard from folks about, if we're just counting them as generic write-ins, are we somehow silencing the voices of Vermonters in some way? I wouldn't make that argument, but I just wanted to put that on the table because I've heard that from multiple people. And I'm wondering if you have a response to that way of looking at write-ins versus what I think you would, what I think you've expressed as the purpose of the primary elections.
It's difficult to argue against people's personal feelings about the votes. But I believe that the vast majority of those individual votes are just like you said. You said, I don't want to vote for any of these people, so I'm going to write in my neighbor. I'm going to write myself in. I'm going to, and I guess personally, I don't see the value in documenting that information down to the level of documenting the name. We're certainly going to acknowledge the fact that the write-in was cast, that they didn't vote for any of the named candidates, that they did take the time to vote, to write in a name. But I think getting it down to the level of documenting the name doesn't seem productive, doesn't seem like it's the kind of data that we need for elections.
I have 3 hands up. Representative Hango, I'll let you have the first response.
Thank you. Although I really appreciate how much work this is for town clerks, I just want to anecdotally talk about some candidates in elections that weren't elections where a lot of people voted. Very, very small number of the population voted in an election. And certain individuals were written in on the town, on the ballots. And those folks were identified to people, 4 people wrote in so-and-so's name. And that actually spurred those people to seek office in some of my little towns. And without that knowledge that people in town were thinking of them for certain positions, they would have never stepped forward. And most of them were, really nominally paid positions, volunteer type things. So I really feel that by losing that in our really tiny towns, we're losing the opportunity to identify folks who would possibly serve if asked.
So since we have Carol for a limited time, I think that's a great point. We will have plenty of time for committee discussion on this today, and if we go into more days on this bill. So I just want to make sure we're asking Carol, and while we've got her with the clerk's perspective on these points. So Carol, do you want to respond to that, and then I'll go to the questions in the room?
Yeah, I did want to respond just because there are separate sections of statute that deal with write-ins for state, federal elections and then for local elections. And what was just talked about was the language around local elections. The bill does propose a change in the way candidates are fill out consent forms or register, whatever term you want to use, for the local elections too. But we wouldn't have to necessarily throw out the baby with the bathwater if it was determined that some kind of an adjustment and registration for state and federal elections was appropriate, but perhaps not on the local election or vice versa. Those are certainly options.
Representative Nugent, did you have your hand up in the race to the buzzer over there?
Yeah, I guess I have
more of a comment, but I just, like thinking about voting, it's probably like the essential thing that our whole, democracy is based on. And being someone who's always loved government and politics, I've never felt like my voice didn't matter. But when I talk to people out in the world, that's like the most common thing you hear is, why bother voting because my voice doesn't matter anyway. And so I guess for me, I don't think that it's, up to me to decide whose voice matters more than others or what their intent was in putting a name on the ballot. And so I guess like that's why I really value that right and ability, because even if someone maybe doesn't seem to be taking it seriously the first time, just the act of participating in an election and putting themselves out there is kind of an act of bravery and like, saying this is who I would like, even though I know that they're not going to be elected, but this is my chance to share that voice. And I worry that when we chip away at that, we chip away at faith and belief in this system that we're all, trying to work through.
So I think, Carol, you had said it's hard to argue with the personal beliefs around this. I think it's hard to argue with Representative Nugent's comment, so I'm not going to ask you to do that. And we will have time for committee discussion and debate on this point because I hold a different point of view on it, but I will bite my tongue right now. Representative Chase.
I want to clarify two things, please. The clerks would still be retaining the ballots if there were any question, right?
Correct.
And they would only be publishing if the candidate consented, like said, I'm actually okay with this and seeking these votes. Is that correct?
Right. So what would happen is on the official return of votes, we would have, declared candidate, declared write-in candidate A got this many votes, declared write-in candidate B got this many votes, and then there were this many undeclared write-ins as a total.
And I guess the third one is maybe for Tim or the chair and Carol's input. I think we had originally the Friday before the Friday for big races and the day of for small and local races. Is that still included, or is it the Friday before the Friday for everybody?
We'll walk through those sections. I kind of jumped ahead because I wanted to make sure we could talk about this with Carol while she was available. But yes, I believe when we walk through the bill, what you'll see is exactly what you said, Representative Chase. And Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but in this draft, we've kept the 5 p.m. Friday before, so 9 days or whatever that is before the primary election, before the general election, before the presidential primary. I think those three are covered by that. And then the local elections, it's close the polls.
Okay. And Carol, can you clarify that the clerks support that differentiation or want it?
Yes. No, we definitely support it. It makes perfect sense because the general election, it's important that the information flow through the Secretary of State's office and that they're able to then inform clerks across the state, because this may be a declared write-in candidate for a statewide office or a countywide office. And so we would need that information to flow down from the Secretary of State's office. As far as local elections, the whole point behind making it close of polls that day is to help that sort of grassroots recruitment that might happen where during the day on town meeting day, somebody's name rises up as a possible write-in candidate for an open school board seat and something. And we would recognize that by saying, they could come in before the close of day and say, yes, I understand people have been writing me in or have wanted to write me in. So yes, I will declare myself as a write-in candidate, count any votes for me. So it's meant to really sort of feed into that local recruitment kind of activity.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly. And sorry, Mr. Chair, one quick addition to that. I was going to say, I think that the filing at the closing of polls for the local election accounts a little bit for the circumstance Rep. Hango was describing. If two people tell this person they're writing them in during the day of the election before 7 p.m., then they just quickly go up and tell the clerk, hey, I want to see my name and votes recorded. And just, if you know, when we get there, we intentionally didn't put a lot of specific requirements about that filing. It just says that it's a statement that I want my votes to be counted. It's not a particular form they have to file, so they can write it down on a napkin and hand it to the clerk at the polling place.
Cool. Thank you.
Representative Waters Evans.
Thank you. Carol, if you don't mind, could you repeat those numbers from earlier? I know you said like 69 people wrote in the governor's name on it, the Democratic. Could you just whatever that little set of figures was? I'm sorry.
Yep.
I didn't write it down.
This was from last August's primary. And these are the numbers for Berry City. We had 212 different names, individual names that had to be reported. And those 212 people received 522 write-in votes. Only 12 of those individual people, 12 of the 212, got 10 or more. The highest one being 69 votes cast for the governor. And each one of those that received 10 or more votes was a named candidate on a ballot and was written in.
Oh, you're breaking up a little bit. I wonder if it might be better if you shut off your video.
Other party's ballot on another party's ballot. And hopefully this will help. So I don't know how much of that. Are you getting me better now?
I got you. I think we lost you. You said there were 69 write-ins for the governor. And then you said out of the 12 who got 10 or more votes, and then we lost you.
Okay. So out of the 12 people who got 10 or more votes, every single one of them was a named candidate on one of the party's ballots and was written in on another party's ballot, clearly indicating that people were wanting to vote their candidate choice and not understanding that they were voting for candidates in a primary to be a nomination for a primary. If that makes sense.
It does, but my follow-up, one more follow-up.
Yep.
When you say they weren't understanding that that's not what it was, that's is it possible that they do understand and they did it anyway?
I'm making that judgment from 15 years of conversations with voters who walk up to me with the 3 ballots and go, I don't want to pick one. I want to be able to vote for this person on this ballot and this person on this ballot. And I have the conversation with them about what the primary actually is and what they're doing. They will have the opportunity to vote for whom they want to in November, but for the primary, they have to do just one ballot. So I hear voter frustration about the primary process all the time. And so I'm extrapolating from those conversations as to what the numbers suggest.
Thank you.
Carol, is there anything you'd like to leave us with from the clerk perspective on the bill? The one piece that we will be walking through when we get back from a break is just the idea that we're raising the minimum threshold for write-ins on the primary ballot to qualify automatically for the second nomination in this draft of the bill. I don't know that the clerks would have any particular position on that, but thought I would throw it out there.
I don't see there being any issues with that. That to me seems pretty straightforward. So, yeah.
But it logistically doesn't create any problems for you.
No.
You're still just reporting the number, and then if they reach the threshold during the canvass, they'll qualify.
Correct.
Any last questions for Carol before we let her go and take a short break? Representative Hooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will or Tim, in the context of this bill, what is the definition of candidate? Not seeing it in this draft.
Candidate, in the overall context of the bill, I would have to double check to see if it's actually defined in Title 17 or not. Well, I'm not sure if you know off the top of your head. But generally, somebody who is running for office and I presume permitted to run for office, meaning the qualifications of them. Sorry, Director Zenning, do you have thoughts on that question?
Yeah, and Will is fine, Tim, if you want. That's also in the definitions section, Representative Hooper, which is 2103 in Title 17, and it's an interesting definition. I've always thought it was interesting. Candidate means an individual who has taken any affirmative action to become a candidate for public office. That's helpful, right? A person takes affirmative action by accepting a contribution or making an expenditure directly or indirectly, filing the requisite petition for one of the named positions, or publicly announcing that he or she seeks such a position.
Oddly enough, the word affirmative action words were going to be out of my mouth in the next question follow-up. So in the context of a write-in, under this language, there is no circumstance under which an individual can be elected unless that individual takes an affirmative action.
As this is written now, yes. Being the filing of that write-in consent form.
Well, that definition, we're not changing that definition though in this bill. That's the existing definition. But yes. So I think what Representative Hooper might be getting at is how in current law do you take an affirmative action if you're written in unbeknownst to you and you win?
That's a decent question.
Essentially, we are effectively blocking that. We and Vermonter from assuming an office by the will of the people.
Alone. Because we all assume office by the will of the people, but not by the will of the people alone.
Well, yeah,
some people.
By the will of the people.
Of certain people.
Candidate.
Yes, a plurality of voters, yes.
Yeah, so this is a heart of this write-in proposal. Representative Higgle, you got it.
Wouldn't that be an easy enough fix to just require a written consent form after you receive the plurality of the votes?
So under this proposal, the challenge with that, I understand it, is that we're asking people if they want to have their write-in votes reported, counted on election night, that they need to file a consent form prior to the election. So if Vermonters organized and said they wanted me to be their candidate for governor, and there was a write-in campaign, or more likely, there's an open seat on the primary for, the Democrat, Republican, or Progressive, and 50 people get together and organize a write-in campaign, that person has no idea that these people have done that. This would preclude us from actually considering that person, to actually put their name printed on the ballot, the way this is written right now. And I am okay with that because I think that people should have to actually want to run for office to be a candidate printed on the ballot. I think what I'm hearing you say, Representative Hooper, is that you'd like to maintain that.
I don't know. It just seems to be a somewhat in line with what Kate said. There's an assumption about elections, and I'm sure there's going to be a circumstance pop up in the future where we have an unintended consequence, whether it's candidate A that has made an assertion drops dead and all the party hierarchy are off on a cruise ship in the Bahamas or something and they can't meet, so you have no candidates. But somebody gets written in. You know, pick your wildest circumstance. It will come to haunt us. And I'm still unsettled about whether I'm uncomfortable or whether I'm just obnoxiously detailed.
Well, I think that's a great point to take a little break on. So we're going to take a little bio break and be back here. I'll say I wanted to give us 15 minutes, so let's call it 10 of. A little more time to talk about these items before our 11:30 bill presentation. So we'll adjourn